In this video, we're going to look at the top 5 most common questions that are asked in supervisor job interviews, and I'm going to help you plan fantastic answers to these that could get you the job as a supervisor. So let's start by looking at question 1. How will you deal with a low-performing employee? And there is a simple procedure to answer this question that tends to score very highly and naturally helps you get the job. So the two things you're going to do is you're going to convince them that you know what you should do and also make clear that you know what you shouldn't do. So if you get across very strongly that you know what you're doing and you know what you should never do, that does convince them that they've probably got the right person. So the do's are make sure that you're supporting that person and that you're mentoring them. You're modeling what being a good employee looks like. You're helping them to achieve that. So you're intervening, you've identified that they're low performing, and you're providing support and mentoring. So your first thing that you're always doing is positive, that you're trying to change the behavior and take an existing employee from a low to a high performing employee. The chances are, as a supervisor, you don't make hire and fire decisions. You may be involved in the recommendation of what happens, but while that person is still working, you're trying to get the best out of them. And a good way to do that is with support and mentoring to fix the problem. That's a great thing to do. So you're also going to set expectations. You have to be clear with this employee. What does success look like? What does performing highly look like? And what are they doing that is not meeting that expectation? So you have to be clear with expectations. It may be that this employee is low performing, but isn't fully aware of why. If they're late all the time, they know that that's not acceptable. But if they're working too slowly, perhaps they need to be told that that's too slow because they might not realize that. So you have to make sure that they're absolutely aware of the expectations. And you have to set targets and be monitoring their progress against those targets. And so a great thing to mention in the interview is to talk about knowing the performance management system. So you know what systems are involved in the company and what the policies are. So what's the appraisal process look like, and what are all the pathways towards, if you have serious concerns, who do you need to speak to? If it's a minor concern, that should be your remit. So you have to know what's your remit and what's someone else's job, and how that all works together. So talk about the performance management system and that everything you do is in line with the company's performance management policies. On the flip side, the things that you don't do is you do not lower expectations. You know what high performing looks like, and you're not going to accept low performance. That you have high expectations, and if an employee is performing poorly, you're just not going to accept that. So be very, very clear that you don't lower your expectations. And you also want to get in this thing about not berating and humiliating. Bad supervisors run their teams through bullying. If someone is underperforming, they will shout at them, they will criticize them in front of other people. And the problem is, if you treat a low performing employee very, very badly, the higher performing employees will realize that they don't want to work here. They don't want to work under you, and they're going to leave. And so you're going to end up left with the people that can't get jobs elsewhere because they're so rubbish at what they do. So never, ever berate or humiliate in public. Any sort of support or positive challenge you're going to do in private. That you never bring up an employee on their performance in front of other people, because that damages the culture. You're also going to be very clear that you're not going to do anything that's going to make it worse. Your job as a supervisor is to raise the performance of employees, and so you need to be conscious of that and make sure you never do anything to make it worse. And a fantastic phrase to talk about is monitoring and intervening, which is a great thing to talk about. And my top tip is to prepare a case study. So if you've previously been a supervisor, talk about, in anonymous terms, an underperforming employee who improved because of what you did. If you've never been a supervisor, you can talk about a supervisor that you admire or a manager that you admire, and talk about how they managed to achieve it and what you learned from observing that is a really great way. So have some sort of case study about what doing this very well looks like. So let's look at question 2. What times are you able to work? And there are 3 things you need to get in your answer. You need to show them that you're flexible. If you are super restrictive on times, that's going to count against you massively. You can lose the entire job over a bad answer to this question. The second thing you're going to show is that you're dedicated. The worst thing you can do in this question is start answering it by reeling off a list of times that you can't work, because that says to the interviewer, you're going to be a nuisance, let's hire someone else that's not going to cause us so much problems. And the last thing, you want to show that you're reliable. And if you can bring any evidence of that, or just mention that you are very reliable and you have very high attendance and you're always on time, that's just a great thing to slip in there. And so some great things to mention that they love to hear is, firstly, you know the company. If the company closes at 5 o'clock, you can say that you can work 9 to 5, which is fine. If the company has odd opening times, be aware of that. So if there's evenings that they're open, that's slightly more difficult to staff. So if you can work then, mention it. If the company operates very late, that's a fantastic time. If it's operating on the weekends, that's a really, really great time. And also, if you've not got other commitments, mentioning that you can work on holidays, particularly school holidays, is a really great thing to get in. The trick is, if you have children and you can't really work the holidays, or you don't want to, instead of saying, I don't want to work the school holidays, don't mention it. Like, really, really try to say yes to as much as you possibly can. Don't bring up the times that you can't work unless you're specifically asked about those specific times, because lying isn't going to help you. So always be positive, mention only what you can do, get in as many of the difficult times as possible, show off the flexibility and show off the dedication. If they challenge you on, could you work these times, instead of saying no, never, say, I have a preference for this, but here's how flexible I could be. So show off as much flexibility and try and frame everything as positively as possible. So question 3, an employee is coming in late regularly. What do you do? And like the first question, we've got a good answer and we've got a bad answer. So the absolute first thing you should always say in this question is that I'm always on time. I'm not going to challenge people for being late and be late myself. That's hypocritical. I am always on time consistently, because if I start being late as a supervisor, that lowers the expectations for everyone, and that's not acceptable. So firstly, I will always be on time, which gives me the moral authority to be able to challenge someone for being late. You're going to be aware of the company policy. For example, if they have a strike system, 3 strikes and you're out, for example, in a certain period, whatever it is, you want to try and know that. And if you can speak to any people who work there, mentioning company policies is a really impressive thing to do in an interview. And tying into that, you're going to set high expectations. So you expect all employees to be on time every day. That's what you expect, and that's what you want to get from your team. A bad answer would go straight to, firing them, because the chances are you probably don't have that authority and you're creating a headache for someone else. Because if you fire someone, they have to be replaced, which can often be a long and expensive process. It's a lot easier to improve your staff than just keep replacing them. Don't ever, show off any low expectations. You say, for example, a bad answer would say, well, if it's just once or twice, that's not an issue. I'd keep an eye on it and see if it gets worse. It's like, no. The expectation is that employees are in on time every day. You have high expectations. And again, never publicly chastise, never bring someone up on anything in front of other people. You'd always do that in private. And again, that phrase, intervene and monitor. So you're going to keep track of attendance, and if there is any issue, you're going to intervene quickly before it becomes a bigger issue. Let's look at question 4. How would you handle a conflict between workers? And this is a simple question to get right and an easy question to get wrong. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to listen. You're going to get a clear picture of exactly what's going on. You're going to speak to both sides and just shut up and listen, because you gather information by listening. If you run in there immediately with loads of action and loads of shouting, you're going to make it worse. You have to know exactly what's going on so you can make an informed decision. You want to talk about being solutions focused. Solutions focused is a phrase that interviewers, love to hear. You're all about the solution. You're all about saying, here's the problem. How do I fix it? How do I fix it? How do I fix it? That's all you're really interested in, is fixing it. And you can also talk about, the agreement, because that's a good way to help resolve conflict, is to show that actually you don't disagree so much. You agree on lots of things, which is a good way to approach it. On the other hand, showing any aggression in your answer will count against you. If you immediately answer this by going, I'm not putting up with that, or, I don't accept conflict, everyone has to work together. Any sort of aggression and bluntness or impatience comes across really badly. And don't show off any negativity, even in your body language. You're always looking to find positive, constructive solutions. So get in all of those 3 key points and absolutely avoid all of the stuff on the other side, and you'll do great on this question. And my top tip for this is to prepare 2 good examples. So think about 2 conflicts you've experienced that have been resolved successfully. It doesn't necessarily have to be by you. One example maybe is what you did, and one example is what someone else did that was really amazing, and you can talk about why that's amazing. So if you can show that you understand what doing this well looks like, that convinces the interviewer that they can trust you to handle conflicts between workers. So let's look at the final question. Question 5, what relevant work experience do you have? And they will ask about, relevant work experience, but if you're crafty in your answer, you can really get in a lot. So the kind of mixture for a good answer is ideally some sort of leadership, or supervising is going to be more important for a supervisor role. If you don't have experience of being a supervisor, you can always bring in any sort of leadership. Industry experience, if you've worked in the same industry, that counts a long way. However, if you've worked in a slightly different industry, you can talk about the similarities between your previous industry and this one and show that there's actually not so much difference. And a good reference really goes a long way. So if you can bring a reference physically and talk about it, it makes it so much more powerful. Rather than just you saying, I'm brilliant at all these things, you can say, I think I'm really good at these things, and I got all this wonderful work experience, and someone else also agrees with me. So some really great things to mention are make all work relevant. So you don't have to leave out lots of work experience. If you can make a link between your work experience and your current role, and with pretty much any work experience you can link to being a supervisor. There's going to be experiences and learning from every job you've ever done. So link as much of it and show off that you're super experienced if you can. Supervising and managing, that's your absolute top of the list. So go in immediately with that. If you've led anything outside of work, for example, you've led a children's, group like Scouts or anything like that, that's a good example. A lot of people overlook that and just talk about work. Leadership outside of work is really valued. Any experience in a related industry, focus on that. And when you're discussing your work experience, one of the best parts of your work experience is to talk about the training that you completed while you were doing that job. So hopefully this video has been really helpful to you. Best of luck in your supervisor interview, and thank you very much for watching.